Hey everybody, first quick introduction. I'm Matthijs. I'm one of the partners at Maven 11 and part of our venture investment team. Today we will be doing a panel on how to scale on-chain governance. To kick things off, I think it's good if we start with a quick introduction, even though most people here will know you all. So Federico.
Hi everyone, I'm Federico, founder of Evmos. I've been working in the Cosmos ecosystem since 2017, and funnily enough, I built the first user interface for governance. So I think we've come a long way today to discuss about how can we improve on-chain governance.
So, hey guys, my name is Kam. I'm taking care of business development and strategy at Imperator.co. And Imperator is a validator mostly focused on the Cosmos ecosystem. So we are currently securing approximately 40 blockchains. A part of our team is also a core contributor at Osmosis. They've created what's called now the info website of Osmosis, and we are working closely with a bunch of different Cosmos projects like Axela, GYDX, Evmos, of course. And yeah, so this is like an overview of what Imperator is.
And I'm Dev Bear, CTO, co-founder of Berachain. Berachain's EVM compatible.
I don't think we can hear you, Dev Bear.
Is the mic on? Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, this is better.
Hi, everyone. CTO and co-founder of Berachain, Dev Bear. Berachain's EVM compatible L1 built on Cosmos SDK. We replace proof of stake with what we call proof of liquidity, which aligns liquidity incentives and things between validators and users on the chain. And lastly, we built Polaris, which is an EVM equivalent framework to allow other chains to integrate EVM into their Cosmos SDK-based blockchain.
We can't hear you very well, I think, so keep the mic closer to your mouth.
I gotta go close, eh? Like this? Is that better?
Yeah, that's
perfect,
better, thanks.
Perfect.
Okay, so maybe to kick things off and set stage a little bit, what are your thoughts on on-chain governance in general? Are you in favor of it or are you opposed to it?
So usually when we talk about governance on blockchain ecosystem, there are two paradigms. One is on-chain, like the ones that are in favor in on-chain governance. Most of them are BFT chains like Cosmos. And then you have like off-chain governance solutions, discussions that are happening mostly in Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., with the EIP's standard and proposals. Of course, I'm biased, given that I've been working in the ecosystem for a long time, but I think there's a really good solution today for working on-chain governance and how can we improve it overall if we think of today's governance only as a framework to start building better governance mechanisms. I think there's a lot of ways that we can improve today's governance model, specifically in Cosmos, and I'm really looking forward to discuss that today with you guys.
Yeah, so my thought on on-chain governance is like, it also depends on what ecosystem you're referring to. For example, I think that Cosmos is quite well advanced in terms of governance compared to ecosystems like Ethereum or Solana or any other chains like that. Because on Cosmos, you also have like governance at the chain level. And because you have governance at the chain level, you have stakeholders such as validators that are quite involved in terms of governance. And I think, so the thing is that we still have some issues to face. For example, if you take the example of the Cosmos Hub and you check all the validators on the Cosmos Hub, the first validator on the Cosmos Hub is Coinbase, and Coinbase is not participating at all on governance. So I would like to see also more development around, some work with centralized exchanges so that they can give the opportunity to their users to give the opportunity to vote on governance, for example.
Maybe to quickly jump in there, do you know why Coinbase is not participating at all?
Yeah, I think it's mostly because of, users from Coinbase. So I think that Coinbase doesn't want to be involved in governance because of maybe regulation, or also because they also, it's like they would vote maybe for their own interest, and maybe that can be like an issue because they have a lot of voting power. So this could be a problem. But yeah, my overview around on-chain governance is quite optimistic because I would say that you give the opportunity to your stakeholders to have an opinion about a specific proposal.
Yeah, in my opinion, one of the biggest things I think is important for on-chain governance is easy ways to express what you want to do as a piece of code. So one model that I think is really interesting is when you can express governance proposals as actual smart contracts. and building like a governance framework that allows like execution, not only like of an instruction really easily, but having like a nice format for maybe writing a smart contract. So like maybe there's an interface that you have to implement in order for it to be an actual proposal. I think what's cool about that is it removes a lot of the nuance and things from the actual, the proposal and like just text in English language, and allows you to be really expressive on exactly what actions are going to happen and what you want to do from a code perspective. So I think things like that are really interesting and can help reduce miscommunication and improve clarity.
Okay, thanks. So I think we're at the Cosmos ecosystem, obviously. A lot of Cosmos people envision a world with like hundreds or thousands of app chains. How can we keep, I mean, it's also the name of the panel, on-chain governance scalable for users? I don't want to spend all my time reading proposals, etc. What's your vision here? Federico, you can go first.
My take is that not all decisions should be taken by every voter. That's why you have representative governance today. It's not democracy in the sense of like one account, one vote, because that's not civil resistant. But what we should definitely do is how can we scale governance by having more representation and more delegation. I think a good framework to do this is liquid democracy. So how can we have more expertise specifically for like technical topics? How can we delegate those votes from validators to like more technical representatives that might be like more suited for different actions? So in this case, a delegator, instead of allocating or delegating their votes to a specific validator, can delegate to another person to vote on their behalf with their voting power on a specific topic. And so that, I think, for scaling governance is really important, because normal users shouldn't care about general topics, but the most important ones to which the community and the protocol itself requires overall participation. Not every single decision needs to be voted by every single account.
To quickly jump in there then, are there some sort of decisions that are more suitable for delegation and others that are like you want everybody to participate in?
I think technical decisions are definitely out of the hands, and then that's when we see higher rates of voter apathy. But I think what the community really cares is the community treasury being well spent? And so they look into this. But of course, sometimes they say, I don't really care about the outcome of this proposal. So the question is like, how do we collectively care about the outcome for the betterment of the protocol itself? So in that case, having good representatives that can represent the different preferences of the different members of the community is really important.
I see the microphone going under the mask. Bear?
It's hard for me to signal that I want to talk. One thing that I find really interesting is because Tendermint validator sets are relatively small, 100, 150, how do we deal with the fact that at the end of the day, the validators get to decide what happens? If a bunch of users say, hey, we want to do this one thing, the validators can always just decide to fork the chain themselves. How do we think that that plays into a role with a model like you're thinking of, Federico?
Yeah, I mean, on our side, as a validator, we are on approximately 40 chains, and honestly, taking care of governance can be a pain. So what we do usually is that we have internally a monitoring system to keep track of everything what's happening, on all the different chains. But if we think about a world that will be maybe in the future 1,000 chains, it can be a real pain for validators. So they can either hire governance people, but it can be very high in terms of human resources. And I really like what Federico said, because there is Kujira, who's doing interesting work around governance. They have what they call a Senate, and the Kujira community vote for 9 people who will take care of anything related to community spend proposal. And I think we should have more innovation around governance, similar to what, for example, Kujira is doing.
To that specific point, also Optimism has a 2-camera model where you have So you have the everyone from the community, you have the validators that are representing the interests of the communities, and then you have another sets of an assembly or a committee based that are specifically elected for different topics. And what's interesting is that both of them can be overwritten by the validators, so like by the members of the community. So it's really interesting how you can like even, and this is what's interesting from a democracy point of view. Today, when we elect our representatives, we can't just like kick them out until the end of their period. With these different governance mechanisms, what you can do is like you have two cameras where if there's like a misbehavior or the representative is not voting on the different proposals, you can just kick them out. Or you can change them like, or select just replace all the members of the assembly every 2 weeks or every month, etc. if there is like a major issue with the governance mechanism going on. So there's like more flexible models. Quadratic voting is one. Liquid democracy is another one. So that we can effectively scale governance in that way.
Kam, you also mentioned you need a lot of resources in-house. Do you think we should incentivize people to participate in governance?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you think we need to incentivize people to participate in governance?
No, I don't think so. I think that, like, as you are, token holder, you're a stakeholder of the chain, and you should, if you want, participate in governance. But if you don't have maybe the expertise to decide on what you should vote on one specific governance, then delegating your power to someone else can be a good solution.
Okay, on the stakeholders and people having incentives, one good example of this, in my opinion, is MakerDAO. You have the maker holders and the people that hold DAI. Even if I hold 1 billion DAI, I have less say than one maker holder. How do you view this in the system? Validators can vote, people with tokens can delegate, but the users of the chain might not have a say. I want to throw this first to you, DevBear, since I think you at Berachain are doing some interesting work here.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like kind of touching back to what you're saying about incentivizing governance as well, is you don't want to incentivize governance by just like giving people tokens or giving them something monetary, but you want to incentivize governance by like creating utility. So like one of the things that we're doing on Berachain is really trying to align governance with the concept of liquidity. We think that, giving people tokens is not necessarily great, but what if there was a way to make it so, you're able to direct liquidity or have a liquidity as a service model, or something that makes it so that a protocol or a user building really wants to get involved with that because it has a benefit to, the liquidity of their protocol's governance token. Which is overall just a net good thing for the ecosystem as well, and that's a large part of why when we think about how we're constructing our validator set, our proof of liquidity, symbol resistance mechanism, et cetera, we think about how can we incentivize people to do governance in a way that is net positive to all. The more liquidity in any token on a chain, especially a chain like ours that has a stable coin built in, and we have like this routing system that allows us to have that hub and spoke model, having liquidity in any governance token is something that's net positive for the whole chain and the whole ecosystem.
You guys have any takes?
Yeah, so if we take the example of Maker, I think that DAI is like a product from Maker. For example, I have a Twitter account, I use Twitter all the time. I don't have, any power on whether we should rebrand Twitter as X or not, Similar to what, like I'm a user of Uniswap, I don't necessarily hold any Uni token, but I use the product, And I think that there is like this kind of distinction, and the incentivization here is like as you get like the power on one specific protocol, your goal is to incentivize any people, any users to use your product without necessarily like give power to those users. So yeah, this is my personal take on this.
So one major problem that I see today is that liquidity today is fragmented, and so is the tokens themselves that represent the voting power for governance. So one major problem that I see is that you have all these tokens allocated and spread across all the interchain, but then you don't use those tokens for governance. And so if you're LPing on Osmosis or you're putting your tokens on Stride for liquid staking, you effectively never use those tokens again for governance purpose, even though you're invested into the ecosystem. And so that's when I think like models like Interchain accounts or a Stride-like project but for governance could be really interesting in order to incentivize participation.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe to pivot the conversation a little bit, since we also have a bear here. How do you view privacy and governance? Do you think voting should be private?
That's an interesting one. I think there's pros and cons to both models. I think in terms of the actual voting, the privacy aspect is really interesting. I think on one hand, giving users the ability to not display their vote is beneficial, but at the same time, transparency when it comes to the actual decisions that are being made is really important as well. I think what's interesting about the delegation model is it does allow you to be somewhat private in that sense, right? Like if I'm delegating tokens to a validator, that validator is voting on my behalf. Even though on chain you can see that I'm delegated to that validator, you can't directly attribute the individual to the decision that validator makes. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think privacy in general though is good, but it only works at that model where it's one token, one vote, or something of the similar sort, which has its own kind of variety of issues for Federico, as you mentioned.
I think that privacy can be great, when there is like the voting period. So because when there is like the voting period and you see like the vote on other people, you can be influenced by what other people are voting on. And having this maybe privacy during that specific voting period can be great. And then having transparency once the voting period is finished to see what are the different type of votes, who's voting on what, and so on. Yeah.
Privacy today is not the biggest problem in governance. So if we take a step back, when we want privacy for voting, is because we want to abstract our result, our option that we selected, from corporations or from governments. There's maybe censorship. Given that today's governance is used mostly for on-chain in protocol, unless there's a clear reason to do that, I don't think that's the best problem to focus our attention when it comes to governance.
That makes sense. You also mentioned that a lot of users will need to have a vote on like spending of the company treasury or the project treasury, etc. How do you view that in relation to privacy? Like DAO members voting on salaries of people who are hired by the DAO or governance, whatever. That's always sensitive and it sort of never ends extremely well, right?
Yeah, so one of the interesting models that we're shipping soon as part of the Evmos 2.0 and EVM extensions is the fact that we have now a framework for smart contracts to utilize on-chain governance, so that you can create DAOs. For example, validators can select different, can create a DAO so that their community, their validator, their delegators can vote and have like a mini vote that they can then cast to the network. And so then you can create these different DAO frameworks that together can create collectively more participation in the protocol.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point because, as a validator, and also Imperator is quite community focused. So we have like different delegators that are just, asking us questions about, okay, what do you think about that specific proposal and so on. And having this kind of maybe, DAOs or something like that in which you can clearly discuss with your delegators about what specific decision and then make a decision on the proposal can be great. I know that Kepler is also doing great work around here in which you can clearly explain your decision on one specific proposal and then you have your delegators that can also put comments on your decision, which is great.
Okay, you just mentioned Kepler. I think right now a lot of governance discussion happens on like Commonwealth and Discord, and then after that it's voted through Snapshot or through a wallet, etc. What tools do we need to scale on-chain governance further? So, I mean, I'm a venture investor. What do I need to fund to help on-chain governance move forward?
So, yeah, so right now it's a pain because the traditional way is to put, for example, a draft on like Commonwealth or let's say the Cosmos Hub forum and something like that. And we have some discussion happening there, but most of the discussion is happening elsewhere, on Twitter, on Discord, on some Telegram private chat, And this is a huge problem because if you're not on one specific Telegram chat, you cannot follow what's happening. So I would say in that specific case, we will need more centralization in which anyone can follow what's happening on one specific proposal and get all the information. Because if someone is asking a question on Discord and someone else is asking the same question on Telegram and someone else is asking the same question on Commonwealth, it's absolutely not efficient. So I would say I don't have the right idea, but we will need some kind of tool that is centralizing all the information on one specific proposal or one specific governance proposal, and then people can just follow everything.
I think it's kind of difficult though, right? At the end of the day, it's partly human nature to want to talk about things on multiple channels, right? In real world governance, right? There's no, central website you can go to get all the information about a, real world political election, right? So I think at some scale, it does make sense to try to have that. But at the end of the day, I think removing, personal Telegram chats and Discords and people talking about these things on forums, et cetera, is something that's kind of unavoidable. And I think the best thing that can be done is, by increasing maybe transparency and making things more on-chain, that those discussions are limited more to educational resources and for research purposes and less for the actual decision being made on.
So the main problem that we have right now in terms of governance is that the weakest link for governance today is client integration. So at most, the number of participants is the number of users that are using Kepler. And I think one of the major advantages of being an EVM chain and what we've strived for in the past year is how can we open governance to other clients, other wallets. And so we had this integration today with Commonwealth, and we had them not only integrate in the same forum the MetaMask, also Kepler and other Cosmos-based wallets to improve the participation so that you have the entire forum on one side, and then you can just go and click vote in the same interface. And so that ease of user experience is what eventually is going to foster more participation, etc. How can we open governance to not only Cosmos, but to other clients that are integrating with the specific protocols? And as you said, it's really not scalable at this point, given that you have every chain creating its own different set of proposals. So having a single integration, as you said, Dev, the standardization is very important to be able to have a maximum number of locations to where to discuss this. But opening the clients to Ethereum, to Cosmos, to even other ecosystem is going to be very important to increase the participation.
Okay, thanks. So let's maybe use the tail end of the panel for some more personal questions. You're both founders, Dev, Bear, and Federico. How do you view founder participation in on-chain governance? Do you take a step back by design? Do you want your voice to be heard as much as possible?
I'm going to give my personal opinion, not representing Evmos, but I think it's important for founders to participate, but not to influence the vote output. So from my particular side, I participate in governance. As long as that's the case, I'm not influencing the result of the vote. And also, what is important to notice is that there's things that you better be abstaining. So I most of the times abstain myself, or simply not vote because of the outcome. I just delegate my tokens to the validators. But yeah, influencing is, I think, the most important thing.
Yeah, I would second that. For speaking personally, I think since typically founders have a decent large share of tokens, it doesn't really make sense. I think no matter what happens, a founder always will influence it, despite them, wanting to or not. Things that are, said on those channels in Telegrams and Twitters, right? Even if they're not directly addressing the question, from learning about a way an individual thinks and just learning who they are as a person, you can kind of infer how they might vote on one thing or another. So, personally, I think it's good to fully abstain from the process because of that. And, typically, and if you look historically, the way that founders vote on proposals is typically the way they swing. And I think a large reason of that is when people are less educated, when people look up to a founder, they love the protocol, et cetera, they don't want to go against the grain. So I think being completely out of the governance process when it comes to an individual as a founder is extremely important to prevent bias.
Yeah, so to summarize, we influence the network already a lot by being part of the core team. And so influencing also in governance is kind of like...
And how do you see the role of maybe your investors in that? Do you want them to actively participate and maybe influence the direction of the protocol?
Sorry, can you repeat?
The role of your investors or backers, etc.
I think it's important for investors to participate as they have vested interest in the protocol, specifically for key decisions. I don't see them participating necessarily on upgrading the protocol or anything that is more on the technical side, because of course they need to delegate that trust to the team and to the rest of the community. But for some key decisions, I've seen them participating.
Oh yeah, go on that.
Yeah, I think like any token holder, it's important that they're involved. Kind of speaking on kind of technical stuff as well. We have investors who are quite technical, so it's they can weigh on things when it comes to architecture, decisions, tokenomics, etc. So I think like any token holder, it's good for them to be involved and can be net positive, especially since typically they are large holders.
And Kam, maybe to hear this from the validator point of view, have you at Imperator ever sort of abstained from a vote that was very controversial because you didn't want to lose delegation, or are you sometimes taking a position that it might cost you something? How do you approach that?
No, so regarding the abstain vote, what we usually do is that we make a decision internally, and if we don't agree internally, and we have, let's say, half of the team that is on the no side and half of the team that is on the yes side, then we just abstain, and we ask our delegators to just override our vote to make their own decision.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, since we're wrapping up here, maybe further out, let's say 5 years from now. Right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum still use off-chain governance, right? Voting with your node. How do you think they will adapt on-chain governance? And how do you see the on-chain governance ecosystem then?
Yeah, so I think the biggest example that we have today of on-chain governance on Cosmos is the IBC specification. That was not on-chain in any way, and was able to become a standard because of adoption of the different chains. So standardization of chain is very important, but in 5 years, I see Cosmos implementing governance as a framework, as a base layer framework, on top of which you can create your own governance models that are specific and cater to your community or to your needs. I think that's very important so that we can build a better system and have more experimentation, which is what we want. Not have something that is very constrained to voting power in a very centralized way that we have right now.
Yeah, I think on-chain governance makes a lot of sense for application layer things. For base layer things, it's really difficult because it often requires code changes to the core software. So I think in the case of Ethereum, since it is 99.9% base layer, if not 100% base layer, it's very difficult to do on-chain governance. Executing a transaction can't change the way that fees are collected or something like that.
Okay, closing words are for you.
No, I mean, so I think on-chain governance is quite important when you want to get the opinion of your own stakeholders, But on-chain governance is not feasible for everything. For example, let's say, I would say my chain is getting hacked or something like that. You cannot just create, a proposal, just take the time to create a proposal, vote it, and so on. It doesn't make any sense. And for that specific cases, you have to do it off-chain.
Okay. Thanks everybody for your time today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.